Hi Year 12, this is part B of exercise 10.44. So we're up to the adjusted trial balance, so this third part here. What I've done is I've just copied and pasted in, just to save a bit of time in the video, all of the accounts that won't change, so that didn't have a balance day adjustment. So all you have to do is simply put an equal sign and then click the one that it relates to, press enter. So I've just copied and pasted those in to save a bit of time. So for those accounts that have a balance day adjustment, we need to adjust them. So for example, advertising expense has 16,000 debit and then a credit of 100. This credit will work to decrease our debit. So remember, if you have a debit and a credit, you'll minus. If it's two debits, you'll add together. Two credits, you'll add together. So in this case, we just put in our equal sign, click the 16,000 debit minus 100 credit, and that's the new figure. See here, vehicle expenses, we've got two debits, so we'll add those together, equals plus 300. Now, this is where it gets a little bit confusing with our bad debts. We've got a debit as well as a credit. So we start off with a debit, so we'll say equal debit plus the other debit, 200, minus the credit figure. So you should end up with a debit of 2,040. The next one down is accumulated depreciation. We've got two credits, so again we add those together. Our credit will be increasing. Here we've got accounts receivable, which has been credited 200, which means it's decreasing. Debit minus credit. Okay, again here we've got it. We started with the credit, we debited that account, which those two will bring it to nil. So the credit minus the same debit is nil, and then we've got a credit of 2,000. So in this one, you can either say equals your credit plus the other credit minus the debit, or you can simply say equal to that 1,000 because it's obvious that they cancel each other out. Here we've got a debit and a credit, so we minus the credit. You'll always minus the smaller figure, so you should never have a negative number. If it's a negative, it means it needs to be in the other column. And then down here, with the new accounts we created, it's just going to be simply equal to those ones. 50 debit. You should just be able to click and drag those down. So if we go down the bottom, we're out by 29,000, which means I've done something wrong. So my error here was that I had the 14,000 in the wrong column. So that should be inventory less the 1,000. 14,000. Check that. All makes sense. All balanced. Perfect. So the next step is to split up our accounts into the income statement and the balance sheet. Now remember, the income statement includes all revenues and expenses, while the balance sheet includes assets, liabilities, and owners' equity accounts. So because we've got them mostly in order, it's as easy as just copying and pasting. You must pick up the adjusted figures, so don't get it from this first one, it must be from that third column. You can press Control C to copy that, then right click, and you need to paste the values. If you just do a normal paste, it'll copy the formulas across and it'll come up with the wrong figures. So paste the values, and you'll select all of those assets, those revenues and expenses. Then we come down and we can select all of our assets, liabilities, and owners' equity accounts. So down to there, Control C, into the balance sheet column. Again, paste the values. And then the last part is to separate the new accounts we made into their income statement or balance sheet. So an inventory shortage is an expense. Accrued expense is a liability, so it'll go on the balance sheet. Prepaid expense is an asset, also in the balance sheet. Interest expense is an expense. Doubtful debts is an expense. Depreciation expense is an expense. If you're unsure about whether these are expenses, assets, liabilities, etc., you need to do a bit of... Okay, from this point, you have completed the hard part. So it's pretty straightforward after here. The last thing to do is to check to make sure that you've got the correct items in each column, so income statement and balance sheet, is to check that it's out by the same figure. So you shouldn't see these as nil. They should be out, but they should be out by the same figure. This figure is your net profit or net loss, depending. Okay, so that's the last thing to check, just make sure they're out by the same figure. If they're not, it probably means that you've put some of these new accounts into the wrong area. So the next step from here is to complete a fully classified income statement and then balance sheet. Now the important thing with these is that you have them set out nice and neatly. You're not necessarily going to have to use all the columns. Although the textbook sets it out like this, I'm not going to be too strict because it can be a little bit confusing. So let's start with the income statement. So the first step is to put in your sales figure. And remember, you need the adjusted figures, so it's just safe to just pick up those figures from the income statement column. Okay, so you pop that in, less our sales return. So back to the 10 column worksheet, pop that figure in, press enter. So we can calculate sales less sales returns. And we also want to less our cost of goods sold. So we need to go and pick up that figure, which is here. Okay, so now we can find out our gross profit figure, which is down 1, which will be equal to our sales less sales returns and the cost of goods sold. So the 159 minus the 38,000, which is our gross profit figure. From here, if we had any other revenues such as commission revenue, rent revenue, we would list them here, total them up in this column, and then have in this column here, you'd have this figure plus your figure for your other revenues. Okay, in this question though, there's no other revenues, so we can leave that blank. Now we need to categorize our expenses into selling and distribution, general and admin, and then also finance. So this is where it gets a little bit more confusing, and you need to know what type of accounts belong in each category. So it's going to take a little bit of a revision for this one. So selling and distribution will include advertising, inventory shortage expense, and the cartage outwards. So selling and distribution include anything that has to do with selling and distributing your product. Okay, so we can pop those figures in straight from the 10 column worksheet. So advertising expense, what's that one? Inventory expense, you'll remember it's down the bottom. And the cartage outwards. So then we can delete the ones that we don't need and just put an underline there and sum those up in the next column. The next category is general and administration. So in here we'll have postage expense. If it was shipping expense, it would go with the selling and distribution because it's just a general postage expense. We'll also have rent expense, telephone, vehicle expenses, your depreciation expense, light and power, office rent, office rent, and finally your wages and salaries. Now remember that if you've got distinction between your wages and salaries for sales staff and then office staff, sales staff need to be included up in selling and distribution. So we can simply copy and paste those in just to save a bit of time. I'm just going to type them all in. But in your exam, make sure you use formulas back to your clean column worksheet just to avoid any human error. Okay. And then finally we're on to our finance. Now this spreadsheet we need to add a few columns, a few rows, sorry, because we just didn't have enough. So just add those in. You just right click on the number out to the side and press insert. So for finance, that would include things like interest expense. And just make sure that your formatting is correct. Interest expense, doubtful debts, bad debts, and also debt collector fees. So just double check your formatting. And you then again would put those figures in from your clean column worksheet. So interest expenses down the bottom, 550, etc., etc. Try not to type them in. I'm just doing this because I'm conscious of the amount of time the video is going for. Okay, so with those ones, we again will sum them both up. Sum column, sum formula, I mean. Then we need to sum our subtotals up. So that one, if you hold down Control, you can just click each of those. Shift maybe. Shift. And close bracket, Enter. Oh, I've done that one twice. Okay. So now we need to calculate our net profit, which is simply our gross profit in this instance, but if you'd had other revenue, you'd pick up the figure that you had here, minus our expenses. Now this figure here should match back to your 10 column worksheet where you've got 9,808. If that doesn't match, you've done something wrong, possibly something in the wrong area, or you've missed something completely. So that should match. That's your check to make sure you've done the right thing. Okay, and then finally you're onto your balance sheet. Similar process. Remember, we've got to categorize our assets into current and non-current, as well as our liabilities into current and non-current. I'm going to do that in another video because I'll probably need more than a minute and a half, but the last video should be a bit short.